I'm going to pass this on to our next presentation. This is Pablo Lamberti, who's an independent scholar, holds a PhD in philosophy from the University of Amsterdam, is an interdisciplinary and intercultural researcher, writer, and teacher. Pablo specializes in our emerging academic movement, using a qualitative historiographic hermeneutical approach. His main philosophical interest is to investigate existential philosophical practices in ancient Greco-Roman and Asian cultures, as well as adapting, revitalizing, and redesigning these practices to facilitate conversion with contemporary existential contexts. Topics he has studied and published in include education, martial arts, ecology, artificial general intelligence. In 2023, he was a 6-month visiting scholar at, excuse me for mispronouncing, but Rikyo University in Tokyo. Besides his dissertation, Befriending the Ears, the Transformative Power of Listening, Pablo published an intercultural philosophy book in the Dutch language about PWL and Zen Buddhism, entitled The Way of the Warrior, on the track of Socrates, Seneca, and the Samurai, 2021, and another book also in the Dutch language, focusing on different categories of spiritual exercises in the works of Plato, Epicurus, the Stoics, and Plutarch, entitled An Exercise in Living, Philosophy as a Craft, 2024. And with that said, he's going to be presenting today on philosophy as a way of life and environmental ethics. Let's give him a round of applause.
So can everyone hear me? Yes, also online, I hope. Put this a bit closer. So yeah, I haven't timed my presentation, but I looked up what a 30-minute presentation, how many words it would contain, and I kind of tried to stick to that. So hopefully that works. With that said, I put my timer on. So yeah, so thank you, by the way, for your presentation. I couldn't have hoped for a better prelude, I suppose, to my topic also. So preliminary remarks. I'm particularly interested in the contemporary potential of PWL. I think it's clear to all of us that that was also one of Hadot's main interests. And personally, I find that one of the most exciting aspects of PWL. I am also aware, however, that it's also very adventurous and risky. There's not yet an extensive body of literature to build on. It involves introducing all sorts of foreign and sometimes anachronistic disciplines to PWL. In my case, I'm also aware of the risk that I'm taking on just too much. PWL, environmental philosophy, Madhyamaka Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, all in one paper of 8,000 words. It's very difficult. So I might actually hand in something quite different from what I'm presenting today. But anyway, you know, with environmental ethics or philosophy, I mean, I'm still doubting how to call it. But there is also a tension of some normativity involved. And that's what I wanted to kind of say before I start, is that today I'm not addressing you only as scholars, but also as fellow human beings. This is something Pablo yesterday inspired me to say, actually. And yeah, it's something important to keep in mind. Having said that, I think the present existential threats of widespread species extinction, climate change underscore the urgency of exploring PWL for its ecological potential, transformative ecological potential. And I propose to do this through the concept of cosmic consciousness, which has been discussed at length during this conference, and see where it gets us, basically. And drawing from environmental philosophy, I aim to develop an ecological approach to cultivating cosmic consciousness. And this has relationality at its core, so that will be an important subject in my paper. And it is grounded ultimately in Buddhism, for reasons that will become evident. So the structure, oh yeah, and I wanted to start with this image, which I think is very powerful and probably also recognizable. I think this not only applies to within academic institutions, some, the tension you highlighted just now, but also outside. So many people want to change, or want change rather, but if asked whether they want to change themselves, then basically everyone is actually happy continuing their lives as they have done so far. And I think this is obviously leading to that end ultimately. So let's see, the structure of my paper is as follows. I begin discussing some key aspects of cosmic consciousness and ecology, both of which fit within the framework of what is called relational ontology. Then I proceed to establishing an ontological foundation for both environmental philosophy and cosmic consciousness through the relational ontology of Nagarjuna, concentrating on emptiness and codependent origination. I'm not going to try and pronounce these Sanskrit terms. We have an Indologist in the room. He can do it for us, should we want. So I will only be highlighting the most important aspects, because I also think that there are other people are just better equipped to explain them, but I kind of operationalize them in the service of my ambition. So I have, by the way, worked on this before, also with Professor Chase. In a previous paper, I discussed meditation in relation to ecology. Also in my dissertation, ecology and PWL were brought into communication. But now I try to do it in a slightly different way. For those who are interested, actually the Bolletino where I published about this subject is there. It was published last year, and there I also talk about Orphic and the Biovices, which I won't be discussing today. But of course, that's something that's very relevant to include in a discussion about these subjects. So this time I examine the practice of metta. Metta is a Pali word, and I want to see whether we can think about it and actually practice metta as a concrete spiritual exercise aimed at cultivating an ecological cosmic consciousness, which we might call an ecocentric consciousness. And one of the reasons for choosing this exercise is that, to me, there seems to be a more direct link to the practical implications of engaging in this exercise than, the better known breath meditations, which I still think, one could hold a whole conference about breath meditation, but, for the popular understanding of breath meditation, there's no direct practical sense of urgency, whereas with the practice of metta, I think it is a bit more evident. So that's why I wanted to propose looking at that. The structure of my paper is as follows. So the things highlighted in yellow is the things that I will try to cover today. And with that, let's get into it. So in his reflections on the similarities and differences between himself and Foucault, Hadot emphasizes a part of practices of the self that Foucault seems to have overlooked. He calls this a movement whereby one rises to a higher psychic level, at which one encounters another kind of exteriorization, another relationship with the exterior. This is a new way of being in the world, which consists of becoming aware of oneself as a part of nature and a portion of universal reason. At this point, one no longer lives in the usual conventional human world, but in the world of nature. What Hadot is expressing here is what is known within PWL as cosmic consciousness. Put simply, cosmic consciousness is an invitation to adopt an objective and impartial view of life. A crucial element of this perspective is a change of interest and identification from the lesser individual to the greater universal self. One finds many examples of such a consciousness in Marcus Aurelius' meditations, for instance, but also in the work of other Stoics, to which I return in a moment. Following Chase, who wrote about this subject and cited James Alston in this regard, cosmic consciousness coincides with an experience that combines the total absence of the old psychic self with the stunning realization of co-identity with the world. In other words, the effect of adopting this perspective was simultaneously psychological, in the sense that one tried to liberate oneself of individual worries, but also ontological in the sense that one saw the universe through a different and fundamentally interconnected lens. I move now to the relational aspect in ecology. So it's well known that ecosystems are fundamentally based on relationships because they are composed of interconnected organisms and ecological factors that rely on one another for the survival and for maintaining balance. These relationships, such as predation, mutualism, symbiosis, create a complex web of interactions that sustain life within an ecosystem. For instance, the predator-prey dynamic regulates population sizes, while mutualistic relationships like pollination between bees and flowers ensure the reproduction and continuation of species. These interdependencies highlight that no organism exists in isolation. Now, there's little doubt about the fact that human beings have severe influence on ecological systems. It is with good reason that our current era is called the Anthropocene. Natural habitats all over the world are changing rapidly as a result of human-induced climate change. In the 70s, a whole new philosophical discipline emerged called environmental philosophy, which focuses on its relations between environmental issues and matters such as science and technology, social, cultural attitudes and processes, and ethical values and norms. And within environmental philosophy, the term basic attitudes was introduced, among others by Dutch ecologist and philosopher Matthijs Schouten. Basic attitudes are the often not fully conscious or explicitly articulated fundamental views or feelings we have about humans, how humans and nature relate or ought to relate each other to each other. So again, there's this moral tension here, especially shifting from environmental philosophy to environmental ethics, which is part of environmental philosophy, of course. Now, the different basic attitudes are at the core of environmental philosophy because they determine how we think about and relate to nature, and more importantly, how we subsequently act on this planet. There are four prominent basic attitudes moving from highly anthropocentric to more ecocentric. I will briefly touch upon them. Man as master, in which humans see themselves as rulers or owners of nature. This is a position that is thought to have originated in the ancient world with Aristotle, especially in his hierarchical and teleological understanding of nature. Of course, there's much more to be said about this, but in the interest of time, I move on. Man as steward is the second basic attitude, a religiously inspired attitude in which humans bear responsibility for the care of the creation, found in all Abrahamic religions. Then there's man as partner, which is embodied by native cultures, such as Native American tribes, African and Asian cultures, and Aboriginals. It's characterized by their sense that nature is not a collection of lifeless objects, but a world of beings with a certain degree of awareness, spirit, and consciousness. Another example of this is Shintoism in Japan, which I've seen from close. And then finally, there's man as participant, in which human beings are seen as deeply entangled with nature. This attitude has been articulated, among others, by the Vietnamese Zen master, who has also been mentioned today, Thich Nhat Hanh. In his vision of interbeing, we are all ontologically connected to the planet through a complex web of relations, without which we cannot exist independently. A sheet of paper, as Hanh frequently discusses as an example, cannot exist independently of the sun, the clouds, the forests, and loggers, and so on. So put differently, it inter-is with all other components that constitute it, which is true for everything that exists. And Hahn's explanation of interbeing inevitably also proposes moral obligations. After all, if we can only interbe, we are responsible for everything that happens around us, including the deprived state of our environment. Okay, now I move on to a section where I kind of try to bring cosmic consciousness together with these ideas about basic attitudes from environmental philosophy. I'll do this slightly briefly than intended. So what do cosmic consciousness and the basic attitude just discussed have in common? Although Hadot never uses the term himself, what he is implying with the term cosmic consciousness is a transformation towards a mode of perception and being that fits within an ontological framework known as ontological relationalism or relational ontology. This is defined by Wesley Wildman as the basic contention of a relational ontology is simply that the relations between entities are ontologically more fundamental than the entities themselves. This contrasts with a substantivist ontology in which entities are ontologically primary and relations are ontologically derivative. So, ancient sages engaged in the cultivation of cosmic consciousness because they were interested in seeking greater awareness of the all-encompassing reality. For the Stoics, being rational demanded a cosmic awareness of the physiological idea that one's mind is always entangled with the entire universe. The divine rationality of the universe is responsible for ordering and interconnecting all parts of our planet. And that's where the word cosmos is, of course, derived from order in Greek. So the Stoic pursuit of living a rational life assumes a consciousness of and connection to the universe, which starts by discovering one's own internal rationality. And actually, that's why I prefer the term cosmic consciousness to the view from above, but we can discuss this later. But what I liked about the presentation about African philosophy is that he said, paradoxically, the view from above is actually a view from within. I think that definitely applies to what I just said about finding our inner rationality in the context of Stoicism. So as we've seen, the Stoic pursuit of living a rational life assumes a consciousness by discovering one's own internal rationality. And this rationality was thought to be inherently linked to the orderly structure of the universe. And lacking this awareness was basically the same as living irrationally. With some adoptions to what we consider to be rational today, this observation, as we will see, still holds true. So relationality is the ontological foundation of the man as participant attitude from environmental philosophy, because it's the most ecocentric attitude, and which also, as we have established, is a fundamentally Buddhist position because it's articulated by Thich Nhat Hanh, but especially also by his intellectual predecessors, Nagarjuna, which is why I included them in my discussion. And Thich Nhat Hanh actually explicitly references Nagarjuna. Okay, so some comments about this. So many ancient sutras thematize the interconnectedness and the interdependence of all beings and things, as opposed to a more traditional Western anthropocentric or human-centered perspective, dependent on the historical era you're looking at, of course. So other sutras point at the root cause of our collective suffering, the thirst to attach, for instance. But later, Nagarjuna relates the root cause of our suffering to the idea of ignorance, to our codependent origination, which is a very difficult Sanskrit word, which I will not again try to pronounce here. But what's important to understand is that this idea of codependent origination is equated to the famous term emptiness, sunyata. So rather than entities having their own essence or own being, there are clusters of relations that arise within the context of pre-existing conditions. It follows that emptiness is relational because it presupposes the impossibility of independently existing things. And this is directly taken from Nagarjuna's Middle Way. He writes, whatever is dependently co-arisen, that is explained to be emptiness. That being a dependent designation is itself the middle way. Something that is not dependently arisen, such a thing does not exist. Therefore, a non-empty thing does not exist. Given the fundamental concept of codependent origination, we can see how emptiness is an articulation of relational ontology, as we just discussed. And to say something that's dependently co-arisen is the same as saying that it is empty. So to Nagarjuna, emptiness represents a middle way between independent existence, which is not possible, and the nihilistic denial of all existence. which is also not what he's advocating. So viewing something as dependently co-origin is to see it neither as non-empty nor as completely non-existent. As Garfield notes, it is conventionally existent but empty. The relational quality of emptiness broadly coincides, and I take this expression or formulation also from Mike Chase. I think that's very aptly chosen. So broad coincidence, or as Pavel said, there's a conversion of concepts, right? Convergence of interests with the relational characteristic of cosmic consciousness and ecology. So one saw the universe through a fundamentally interconnected or empty lens in which the individual does not exist separately from the greater whole. Now applying this to the ancient Stoic conception, for instance, of cosmic consciousness. You know, and we all originate in codependency. And nature and ecosystems are also fundamentally based on relationships. They are also empty, in other words, because they are composed of interconnected organisms and ecological factors that rely on each other. In other words, they arise in codependency. So again, I think this framework of Nagarjuna fits really well to both cosmic consciousness and environmental philosophy. So we should add here that living beings and ecosystems may be empty, but they're also capable of suffering. So that's an important aspect of environmental ethics. Sorry, I see that I didn't skip to the next slide anyway. Now, proceeding on a note on PWR and Buddhism. So it's clear that philosophy in antiquity was not seen as a quick remedy for an acute discomfort, but as a true craft. This has also been noted by other speakers during this conference, that requires constant dedication and intensive practice as ascesis. With this view, we can reframe the meaning of philosophy in the past, the present, and the future. This is one of the strengths of PWL today. In the practical sense of Buddhism, however, prajna, wisdom, is not discursive but meditative knowledge, and thus cannot be acquired through the study of texts only, but primarily through actual meditation. And as Marc-Henri de Roche also pointed out, through memorization, which is also an exercise, both in Western antiquity and Asian contexts. So there might be a difference between PWL and Buddhism here. But as yeah, okay. So there might be a difference here, but as Apple notes, Haddo's use of wisdom may not correspond one-on-one with Buddhist notions of wisdom. On the other hand, understanding prajna in terms of exercises in the service of spiritual transformation, it does allow us to characterize Nagarjuna's ideas in a PWL sense. So like PWL, which is not merely discursive, but accentuates a lived practice through spiritual exercises, Nagarjuna seems to recommend something that seems broadly compatible. Again, there's a convergence in concerns with PWL, especially insofar as he urges his readers to practice daily the paramitas, or the perfections. And this is a therapeutic aspect in Nagarjuna's work, which is arguably more dominant than the logical argumentation of his writings. But that doesn't mean, of course, that the logic is not important. So he uses logic to arrive at a therapeutic emphasis. So the late Theravada Buddhism scholar Stephen Collins, who also contributed to Fiordali's book that was highlighted earlier, already saw the work of Haddo and others insofar that they could be labeled as practices of the self. This is Foucauldian term, as attempts that articulate what Theravada Buddhists had advocated for more than 2 millennia. Collins desired to put Haddo and Foucault in conversation with Pali Buddhists, but due to his untimely death, he never succeeded at pursuing this ambition to completion. According to Collins, it's possible to draw Pali analogies to the ancient Greek meaning of ascesis, especially insofar ancient philosophers committed to a certain existential choice and accompanying way of life. And this conception of philosophy, with its practical emphasis, resonates with Buddhist monasticism as he understands it. Now, I discuss Pali because metta is a Pali word and also a Pali a practice originating from the Pali canon. Now I move on to the final section. So here I consider the concrete Theravada exercise known as metta. Usually it's translated as loving kindness, which is a 16th century rendition of the Old Testament Hebrew word chesed. I don't know how to pronounce that. I don't speak Old Hebrew, but it refers to God's love for Israel, as Collins also points out. And of course, that's very anachronistic and very strange. But later, probably sometimes in the 19th century, this translation was also chosen for metta. However, according to Collins, this is not only highly idiosyncratic and inappropriate, it is also inaccurate. Metta is derived from the Pali word mitta, which means friend. Therefore, friendliness would be more of a correct translation. And for similar reasons, other scholars have suggested basic friendliness or simply goodwill. I chose to use metta, so I don't run into any translation issues. So I'll skip the canonical texts on metta where it originated. Of course, I will include it in the paper, but in the presentation I'll skip it for now. But it's interesting to see why the Buddha assigned the practice of metta for the particular problem of those with a character type that is disposed to ill will, which according to Shaw, another scholar, a Pali scholar, is synonymous to hatred. So ill will or hatred is one of the 5 hindrances one can encounter in the practice of meditation as obstacles that prevent the mind from experiencing calm and alertness. Which is perhaps also reason to focus on metta as opposed to meditation, breath meditation, because metta actually is a kind of preparational exercise for meditation. It helps us get rid of these obstacles. Ill will encompasses different states that differ in intensity, ranging from mild irritation and petulance to great malevolence. In all these states, ill will is always accompanied by an unpleasant feeling. In his commentary on the divine abidings, Buddhaghosa, a 5th century Theravada Buddhist commentator and philosopher, recommends that the practitioner of metta starts by reviewing the dangers in hate. After all, the opposite of hate needs to be cultivated in this meditation, friendliness. And for that, hate needs to be known first before it can be abandoned. The danger of hate is explained in quite a straightforward manner. A hateful person has fallen prey to hate and has become obsessed by it. As a consequence, this person is inclined to kill living things. To purify the mind of hatred, one should develop metta. To overcome self-hatred, one has to learn how to be friendly to oneself, because the metta practice actually starts with oneself before it can extend to things outside ourselves. So in our social media driven narcissistic times, this advice of Buddhaghosa to be friendlier to ourselves or to love ourselves more than we already do seems a bit weird. But there it is referring to something Collins explains as getting over self-hatred. And the underlying idea of overcoming self-hatred is that one who is friendly to oneself, or rather, one who is not friendly to oneself is not capable, one who is friendly to oneself is not capable of harming someone else. So that's the basic idea. As such, this self-love or self-friendliness in a Buddhist sense is not self-indulgence, but a deeper understanding of one's interconnectedness with others. It also involves recognizing life as part of the whole, which is believed to foster compassion for all living things. Thanks. Okay. How the relational insight of interconnectedness and Buddhism of non-harm naturally to environmental consciousnness is eloquently articulated by philosopher and American Theravada Buddhist Bhikkhu Bodhi. Yeah, I won't read it in the interest of time, but it's not difficult to see how this attitude cultivated through metta could impact how we interact with and care for the environment. Sri Lankan Theravada Buddhist monk Bhante Gunaratana offers examples of metta in environmental contexts. Compassionate farmers in Sri Lanka, for instance, repel insects using herbal plant extracts rather than harmful chemicals. They pour the extract into irrigation water, which spreads across the rice fields, emitting an odor that repels insects without killing them. This is also an instance of perma-farming, basically. But according to Gunaratana, this practice exemplifies metta in action, caring for crops without harming other life forms. And other simple actions he discusses, such as using energy-efficient light bulbs, turning off unnecessary lights, planting trees, are also examples of environmentally conscious behavior rooted in metta. Gunaratana emphasizes that making such actions habitual requires mindful awareness and a constant effort to keep thoughts of metta at the forefront of our minds. In this way, the practice of metta becomes not just a meditation on personal well-being, but a conscious, cosmic, and compassionate way of living that respects and cares for the earth. Okay, so some concluding remarks. Like PWL, the aim of Buddhist practice is not to dwell on theoretical possibilities, but to allow our inherent potential to manifest in wise and compassionate ways, fostering the well-being of all life forms. At the same time, we cannot expect either PWL or Buddhism to single-handedly resolve the ecological crisis or overcome the widespread apathy surrounding it. Referring back to the image I showed. What they do offer, however, are approaches to cosmic consciousness that could inspire ecological transformation. Today, the ancient calling for the care for our souls, epimeleia tes psyches, which has always been more than mere self-help, cannot avoid including care for our natural surroundings. The Stoics understood that failing to recognize our fundamental cosmic interconnectedness, our shared rational nature, leads to irrational living. What can be more irrational today than actions that accelerate the disappearance of our own descendants? One approach I have suggested for cultivating cosmic consciousness is the practice of metta, which promotes the transformation from an egoistic self to a cosmic self. The aim of this exercise, as I've portrayed it, is to cultivate an attitude of man as participant, rooted in the Buddhist understanding of ontological relationality, or codependence, in Nagarjuna's terms. This combines Haddo's cosmic consciousness, supplementing it with an intercultural shift from anthropocentrism to ecocentrism. We might call this a state of ecocentric consciousness, an attitude reminiscent of the Orphic reference and perhaps love of nature, friendliness to nature that extends beyond personal well-being and challenges the individualistically consumer-driven mindset that fuels environmental destruction. Although I agree with you that our neoliberal times is not the only cause of today's problems. But to me, this echoes Haddo's description of cosmic consciousness, in which the self is liberated from the state. I have it here, yeah. Liberated from the state of alienation into which it has been plunged by worries, passions, and desires. The self liberated in this way is no longer merely our egoistic, passionate individuality. It is our moral person, open to universality and objectivity and participating in the universal nature or thought. Can metta truly influence ecological behavior? Can the practice of metta help preserve rivers, forests, and oceans, protect animals from extinction, or mitigate climate change? While direct impacts may be difficult to measure, it is reasonable to assume that transforming ill will into friendliness and care can inspire at least a shift in our basic attitude to nature. And by seeing ourselves as participants in nature rather than separate from it, we may adopt habits that promote environmental well-being and support the flourishing of humans, animals, and plants alike. But regardless of the outcomes, like ancient philosophical teachings, Buddhist teachings do not tell us what to do, but concentrate on how to do it. Better even, the spiritual exercise of metta provides guidance. It's not an end in itself. It should be seen as a raft that helps one cross a river in a certain way. One should, however, not confuse the vessel with its function, otherwise it is in a Buddhist analogy. like being taken from one side of the river to the other, but then refusing to get off the raft, because the true meaning of the raft as a means of transport is lost. In addition, one of the distinctive features of Buddhism is that of detachment. This is also true for the attachment to our actions and especially the results. So like the Stoic disposition of indifference to the things that are out of our sphere of influence, our focus should be on the best we can do, on the skill that we are capable of acting regardless of the consequences. With that in mind, I would like to end with one of Marcus Aurelius' most beautiful and pressing quotes cited by Hadot on more than one occasion. Don't wait for Plato's Republic, rather be content if one tiny thing makes some progress and reflect on the fact that what results from this tiny thing is not a tiny thing at all. Thank you very much.
All right, we have about 6 minutes for questions. We went just a bit over. It looks like Sundar in the chat has one, so I'm going to read it out. Hadot did not develop a systematic theory of cosmic consciousness, which has close links to the experience of the oceanic sentiment, for very wise reasons. Similarly, that Nagarjuna developed a theory of relational ontology is highly contested by those interpreting Buddhist practices from the skillful means perspective. Though you have emphasized the meditative ends of these theories, it becomes problematic to present them as theories proper for the in the first place. Please comment. Thanks.
Sorry, that letter? Oh.
Basically, he's wondering about like the application of these ideas from Nagarjuna, since Hadot didn't have a theory of cosmic consciousness, and B, scholars of Buddhism contest whether or not Nagarjuna had a relational ontology in the first place.
I don't think he's saying he didn't have a theory of consciousness.
No.
Can you go back to the top?
No, he said he doesn't have a systematic theory, but that's what I was saying.
Yeah. But that final part becomes problematic to present them as theories proper in the first place. Okay, so
at least when it comes to environmental ethics, I think is the idea.
I don't think I probably agree that there's no systematic theory of cosmic consciousness, at least not in Hadot. I don't think I presented it that way either. I use it as a concept to revitalize, and by that I mean to operationalize in a plausible way. While of course I'm mindful that there's risk involved in that, and especially the kind of Stoic cosmic consciousness is very different from the cosmic consciousness I have presented today. So in that sense, but I didn't try to do it in a systematic way. So, and as far as Nagarjuna, whether that's contested, I mean, I would like to hear the arguments then, for why it is not possible to interpret it as a relational ontology. If I don't know those arguments at the moment, then it's difficult for me to comment on it. But I would love to engage in a discussion about it, of course.
You too, David, and then Mike. So David, go ahead, unmute and
Hi there. Yeah, actually, maybe it's just to, first of all, I've been teaching environmental philosophy and ecological self for 40 years, so it's good to see it getting forward. I think I want to support Sundar's point, but also support yours. My main difficulty is, I would say, I mean, your approach is excellent. However, I would say is one-sided with the environmental ethics and philosophy, where we can look at Hadot and PWL. I'm thinking of the arguments between Ness and Bookchin and Warwick Fox, and there's a whole tension there which you could bring to bear, and then maybe argue about why you want to suggest your view, which has been said many times by the Buddhist ecological self people. So that was all really to complement what I think Sundar is getting at. In my jargon, there's a theory of self intrinsic, which we have to pick out. And whether you want to go down the hard nature view of Bookchin, which is about capital and economics, or the difference between cosmological identification, ontological identification, ecocentric self, which Fox gets at. So there's a long history here which could supplement the PWL side rather than the relational ontology, I think. So I just wanted to add in, it's a very difficult area, and what I agree everything with what you're doing, but I think I'd like more historical sensibility about the arguments within environmental ethics where PWL can make a big contribution by broadening the challenges of what it actually means to do the activities which are ecocentric, of which you've just presented one particular picture. If that's helpful, I don't know.
Very helpful. And after the conference, I would like to talk to you about these.
Yep. Sure.
And I'm very mindful of what you said, at least as far as it goes. I've only presented a very small area of what is called environmental philosophy. So I just took one aspect of it and tried to focus on that. But so as I highlighted in the beginning, I'm aware also of the risk of bringing in too much, and then it's impossible to stay within the 8,000 word limit. Of course, that's not an excuse not to be very precise and careful about the sources. So at the same time, at the beginning of this conference, I already ordered a new book about cosmic consciousness and ecology from his name is Hess, yes, which I intend to include in this discussion. So I know that is probably still underdeveloped at the moment. So it's work in progress, and I will definitely try to include some of or all of your comments as far as I can. But for that, I would love to contact you also.
Yeah, well, I'll help you as much as I can. I'm thinking more of how can PWL inform environmental ethics. That's where the chapter would be valuable within that very, so that's really where, yeah. But anyway, I'll speak to you and if I can help your chapter in any way, then there you go.
So we're already spilling a little over, but I think we can afford a minute and a half or two.
Okay, no. Yes, thanks for a really original and fascinating contribution. I too would have a little bit of reserves about relational ontology as far as Hadot is concerned. I'm not sure that he would go so far as to say that relations are more real than substances. Problematic as so far as the soul is concerned. I don't think he would say the soul is merely relation. But it is interesting, on the other hand, that the contemporary scientists from various disciplines, from the physicist like Pablo Lamberti to a cognitive science scientist like Giuseppe Pagnoni, who I'm going to be talking about, do find this relational ontology as the best way to explain contemporary scientific findings. But I just want to quickly to come back to another potentially difficult point, which is meta. As you know, in disciplines like mindfulness, you often see a bit of a travesty of this idea. The idea that one starts off with expressing love or friendliness to oneself quickly morphs sometimes in popular expositions to the idea that you're perfect just the way you are. You're wonderful. You don't need to work on yourself at all. And that I think would be anathema to Hadot's basic ethics is and always was perfectionism. I wonder if you have any comments on that.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. And I completely agree with respect to the letter and the former. I'd love to talk to you about it in more detail. I recognize also what you're saying. I've even been to conferences where we would kind of practice these things together, and it seemed very strange and alien. And I don't think.
At least the narcissism bit.
Yeah. So there's a real danger of narcissism there, and I kind of highlighted that we already live in narcissistic times. So what we don't need is more of that. So I completely agree with that. But this is just also very experimental thought. But I was thinking like this idea of overcoming self-hatred is in a sense interesting, because it seems almost as if, so we are on a path, it seems, to self-destruction as far as the environment goes, to put it very simple. It's oversimplified probably, but if you look at the news and all the developments around that, it's not going well, it's going downward. So in a sense, you could say, you could perhaps think like, do we even love mankind, including ourselves, enough to kind of come to the rescue, or is it perhaps an expression of self-hatred that we are on this track? This is, of course, experimental thought, and I haven't thought it through yet. But
Maybe it's just that we love immediate self-gratification more than we do renunciation of immediate self-gratification.
I'm just gonna close off, we can do follow-up at the table, same with discussion online, but let's do another round of applause.